Hollywood, 1972. Two legends stand face to face on a film set in Rome. One is already a global icon, Bruce Lee, the lightning-fast martial artist who moves like water and strikes like thunder. The other, Chuck Norris, a quiet Texan with humble roots and fists that could break concrete. They're supposed to be filming the final fight scene for Way of the Dragon, but something shifts. Bruce, riding high on fame and adrenaline, makes a comment that cuts deeper than any kick. "You're good, Chuck," he says with a smirk, "but you're too slow for someone like me." The words hang in the air like smoke. Chuck doesn't respond. He just nods, his jaw tight, his eyes focused. What happens next isn't just a fight scene. It's a lesson, a painful, unforgettable reminder that speed isn't everything, and that the quietest man in the room is often the most dangerous. This is the story of the day Bruce Lee learned what it truly means to underestimate a warrior. Let's rewind a bit. To understand what happened that day in Rome, you need to understand who these men were, not just as martial artists, but as human beings with dreams, wounds, and something to prove. Bruce Lee was a force of nature. Born in San Francisco, raised in Hong Kong, trained in Wing Chun under the legendary Ip Man, Bruce had spent his entire life perfecting speed, precision, and philosophy. He wasn't just fast, he was impossibly fast. His 1-inch punch could send a man flying backward. His kicks were so rapid they'd blur on camera, forcing directors to slow down the film just so audiences could see them. He developed his own martial art philosophy, Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, which emphasized adaptability, directness, and eliminating unnecessary movement. By 1972, Bruce had conquered Hong Kong cinema with The Big Boss and Fist of Fury. He was on the verge of international superstardom. Magazines featured his face. Children mimicked his moves. He was a dragon, fierce, untouchable, unstoppable. And he knew it. But with that fame came something else, an edge, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. Bruce had fought hard for recognition in Hollywood, only to be passed over again and again. He'd pitched The Warrior, the show that would become Kung Fu, only to watch it get handed to David Carradine, a white actor with no martial arts background. He'd been told he was too Chinese for American audiences, that his accent was too thick, that he'd never be a leading man in the West. Those rejections burned. They festered. So when Hong Kong embraced him, when millions of fans screamed his name and hung on his every move, something inside Bruce hardened. He became protective of his legacy, obsessive about being the best, meticulous about every detail of his image, and maybe, just maybe, a little too confident, a little too quick to dismiss anyone who might challenge his supremacy. Then there was Chuck Norris. Chuck didn't come from money or fame. He grew up poor in Ryan, Oklahoma, the eldest son of an alcoholic father and a Cherokee mother who worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. He was shy as a kid, skinny, bullied at school, afraid to speak up. His childhood was marked by uncertainty, poverty, and the constant fear that his family might fall apart completely. But when Chuck joined the Air Force at 18 and was stationed in South Korea, everything changed. He discovered Tang Soo Do, a Korean martial art that emphasized discipline, respect, and devastating power. Chuck fell in love with it. For the first time in his life, he had structure, purpose, a path forward. He trained obsessively, often 6 hours a day, pushing his body beyond exhaustion. He earned his black belt, then another. When he returned to the States, Chuck opened his own dojos in California. He competed in tournaments and became a dominant force, winning multiple world karate championships. He was respected in the martial arts community, known for his humility, his work ethic, and his bone-crushing roundhouse kicks that could drop opponents in seconds. But he wasn't flashy. He didn't seek the spotlight. He didn't trash-talk his opponents or showboat for the cameras. He just trained, taught, and competed with quiet dignity. When Bruce Lee called him in late 1971 and asked if he'd like to be in a movie, Chuck was honored. Bruce was a legend, a pioneer who'd broken barriers and shown the world what martial arts could be. This was a chance to work with the best, to learn from someone who'd reached heights Chuck could only dream of. But Chuck didn't know that Bruce had an agenda. He didn't know that Bruce saw him not just as a co-star, but as a challenge, A test, a way to prove, once and for all, that speed conquered everything. The production of Way of the Dragon was Bruce's baby. He wrote it, directed it, starred in it, and produced it. He controlled every detail, from the camera angles to the costume choices to every single frame of choreography. The film told the story of Tang Lung, a martial artist from Hong Kong who travels to Rome to help his relatives defend their restaurant from mobsters. The climax would be an epic showdown in the Roman Colosseum. Bruce's character facing off against Chuck's character, Colt, an American martial arts champion hired by the mob. It was supposed to be the ultimate test, East versus West, speed versus power, the dragon versus the quiet warrior. Chuck arrived in Rome in early 1972, excited and a little nervous. He'd never acted before. He didn't speak the language. He'd never been on a film set. But Bruce assured him it would be fine. "Just be yourself," Bruce said, flashing that famous grin. "You're the villain, but you're a worthy villain. This fight needs to feel real. It needs to be the best fight scene ever filmed." And it did feel real. From the moment they started rehearsing, it was clear that Chuck was no pushover. Bruce would throw a flurry of punches, 5, 6, 7 in rapid succession, and Chuck would block them with ease, his hands moving like iron shields. Bruce would launch a spinning kick, and Chuck would sidestep with perfect timing, counter with a devastating leg sweep, and force Bruce to reset. The crew watched in awe. This wasn't just choreography. It was a chess match. Two grandmasters testing each other's limits, feeling out weaknesses, adapting in real time. The stunt coordinators whispered excitedly. The cameramen repositioned to capture every angle. Even the extras stopped what they were doing to watch. But Bruce didn't like it. At first, it was subtle. A frown here, a muttered comment there. "Let's try that again," Bruce would say, adjusting the sequence so his strikes landed more cleanly, so Chuck's counters looked less effective, so the power dynamic shifted more clearly in his favor. Chuck noticed, but he didn't say anything. He was a guest on Bruce's film. He was there to help Bruce shine, to make Bruce look good. That's what professionals did. Then came the day of the big rooftop rehearsal, 3 days before they were scheduled to start filming the Colosseum fight. They were blocking out a complex sequence where Bruce would feint high with a punch, drawing Chuck's guard up, then drop low with a sweeping leg kick, catching him off balance. Bruce demonstrated at half speed, his movements fluid and controlled, each motion precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "See how the weight shifts?" Bruce explained to the crew. "This is about timing. Speed and timing. Now you try," he said to Chuck. Chuck nodded and mirrored the move. But his version was different, more grounded, more economical, less showy. Where Bruce was water flowing around obstacles, Chuck was stone breaking through them. And when Chuck threw the counter kick, a rising knee strike followed by a roundhouse. It came so fast and so hard that Bruce had to leap back to avoid having his ribs caved in. The crew gasped. Someone dropped a coffee cup. Bruce's face darkened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He walked over to Chuck slowly, deliberately, his expression unreadable. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was the distant hum of Rome traffic and someone's nervous breathing. Then Bruce smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something cold in that smile, something wounded. "You're good, Chuck," he said, his voice calm but carrying a strange weight. "Really good, but you're too slow for someone like me. In a real fight, I'd have hit you 3 times before you even saw me coming." Chuck felt the words like a punch to the gut. Too slow? He'd just moved faster than anyone else on that set could follow. He'd trained for 15 years. He'd won world championships against the fastest fighters on the planet. But he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just nodded, his jaw tightening, his hands clenching briefly before releasing. "Whatever you need, Bruce," he said quietly. "I'm here to make this work." Bruce turned away, already moving on to the next shot, calling out instructions to the crew. But something had shifted. The respect that had been there, the mutual admiration between two masters, was now mixed with something else. Pride, insecurity, maybe even fear. Bruce had built his entire identity around being the fastest. It was his trademark, his superpower, the thing that made him special. And Chuck, without even trying, without even meaning to, had shown that speed wasn't the only thing that mattered, that there were other kinds of strength, other kinds of power. Over the next few days, the tension on set grew thicker. You could feel it in the air like static before a lightning strike. Bruce began pushing Chuck harder during rehearsals, increasing the speed, changing the choreography on the fly without warning. "Keep up," Bruce would say with a grin that didn't quite look friendly anymore, and Chuck would, every single time. No matter how fast Bruce went, Chuck matched him. No matter how technical Bruce made the sequences, no matter how many rapid direction changes or unexpected strikes, Chuck adapted. And that only seemed to frustrate Bruce more. The crew started whispering during breaks. Some thought Bruce was testing Chuck, trying to bring out his best performance, to push him beyond his comfort zone. They'd seen Bruce do this before with other actors, demand more, expect perfection, refuse to settle for anything less than extraordinary. Others thought something darker was happening, that Bruce was trying to prove a point, to show that no one, not even a world champion, could match the dragon. But Chuck, he stayed silent. He absorbed every critique, every adjustment, every cutting remark. When Bruce told him to do a sequence again because his timing was off, Chuck did it again, and again, and again. When Bruce changed the choreography for the fourth time in an hour, Chuck memorized a new version without complaint. He was a professional. More than that, he was a martial artist. He knew that ego had no place in the dojo, or on a film set, but inside, something was stirring. Not anger, exactly, not resentment. Something quieter and more dangerous, resolve. Chuck thought about all the years he'd trained, all the mornings he'd woken up at 5 a.m. to practice kicks, until his legs screamed. All the tournaments he'd won not through flashy moves or showmanship, but through patience, timing, and devastating precision. All the students he'd taught, emphasizing respect, humility, and control above all else. He thought about his master, Jay Chul-shin, who'd once told him, "The loudest student is rarely the best student. The fighter who talks the most usually fights the least. True power doesn't need to announce itself." Then came the pivotal moment. They were filming the climactic fight scene in the Colosseum. The real Colosseum. 2,000 years of history surrounding them. Gladiators' ghosts in every stone. The cameras were rolling. The lights were blazing. Hundreds of extras filled the ancient seats. This was it. The moment that would define the film. The sequence that audiences would remember forever. Bruce launched into choreographed sequence. A rapid combination of punches, kicks, and acrobatic flips that showcased everything he was known for. Speed, agility, precision, power. Chuck responded exactly as rehearsed, blocking and countering with controlled force, selling each impact, making Bruce look incredible. But then Bruce ad-libbed. He threw a spinning back kick that wasn't in choreography, aimed directly at Chuck's ribs with full force. Not a movie kick, a real kick, the kind of kick that could crack bones, collapse lungs, and a fight in one shot. Chuck saw it coming. In a fraction of a second, less time than it takes to blink, his body reacted. Years of training, thousands of hours of sparring, countless competitions where a split-second decision meant the difference between victory and defeat. He sidestepped with perfect economy of motion, caught Bruce's ankle midair with both hands, and with a controlled twist, swept Bruce's standing leg out from under him. Bruce hit the ground. Hard. The crew froze. Someone's walkie-talkie crackled. An extra coughed. But nobody moved. For a heartbeat that felt like an hour, Bruce lay there on the ancient stone, staring up at the Roman sky, his chest heaving. His eyes were wide, not with pain but with shock. Complete, total shock. When was the last time someone had put Bruce Lee on the ground? When was the last time he'd been caught off guard, outmaneuvered, made to look vulnerable? Then he rolled his feet with that cat-like grace he was famous for, brushed the dust off his yellow jumpsuit, and walked off set without a word. No eye contact, no acknowledgement, just silence. "Cut!" The assistant director yelled, but it was too late. The damage was done. Chuck stood alone in the center of the Colosseum as the crew scattered, giving Bruce space, giving everyone space. His heart was pounding, not from physical exertion, but from something deeper, regret, confusion, and a gnawing fear that he'd just destroyed his relationship with a legend. He hadn't meant to embarrass Bruce. He'd only reacted on instinct, the way his teachers had drilled into him for years. See the attack, defend, counter, survive. But looking at the faces of the crew, at the way they avoided his eyes, Chuck realized how it must have looked. Like he'd humiliated Bruce. Like he'd proven that Bruce's speed wasn't enough. He thought back to his early days in Korea, training under Master J. Chul Shin at the Osan Air Base. Master Shin was a small man, barely 5'6", wiry and unassuming, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But when he moved, the air itself seemed to bend. He had a presence that filled the entire dojo, a quiet power that demanded respect without ever asking for it. Chuck remembered the first time he'd sparred with him. It was 6 months into his training, and Chuck had been so confident, so sure of his size and strength. He was bigger than Master Shin, younger, faster. He'd thrown punch after punch, kick after kick, using all the techniques he'd learned. And Master Shin had simply let him. He'd moved just enough to avoid serious damage, blocked just enough to stay safe, and waited. Then, with a single fluid motion, so simple it looked like nothing, Master Shin had swept Chuck's legs and pinned him to the mat. Chuck couldn't breathe, couldn't move. It was over before he even understood what had happened. Strength is nothing without control, Master Shin had said, his voice gentle but firm, his knee still pressed against Chuck's chest. Speed is nothing without timing. Flash is nothing without substance. You must learn to be still inside, even when everything around you is chaos. The greatest warriors don't fight to prove they're strong. They fight only when they must, and when they do, they fight with purpose. Chuck had carried those words with him ever since. They'd made him a champion. But more importantly, they'd made him humble. He knew that there was always someone faster, someone stronger, someone with a better technique. The key wasn't to prove you were the best. It was to keep learning, keep growing, keep respecting the art and everyone who practiced it. Meanwhile, across the set, Bruce sat alone in his trailer, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His knuckles were white from clenching his fists. His jaw ached from grinding his teeth. He looked at himself, really looked, and didn't like what he saw. When had he become this person? When had proving himself become more important than the art itself? When had speed become an obsession instead of a tool? Bruce thought back to his own master, IP Man, the legendary Wing Chun teacher who'd taken a cocky, angry teenager and taught him not just how to fight, but how to think. Bruce remembered a day in Hong Kong years ago when he'd been showing off for other students. He'd been impossibly fast even then, demonstrating complicated combinations, making the other students look clumsy by comparison. Ip Man had watched silently for a long time. Then he'd called Bruce over. "Bruce," he'd said in Cantonese, his voice soft but cutting, "you are very fast. Perhaps the fastest student I've ever taught. But tell me, why are you fast?" Bruce had been confused. To be effective, master. To strike before my opponent can react. "No," Ip Man had said, shaking his head. "You are fast because you are afraid. You are fast because you think that if you slow down, people will see that you are just a boy with something to prove. Speed can be a shield as much as a sword. Be careful that you don't hide behind it." Bruce had been angry at the time, dismissive. What did Ip Man know? Bruce was going to be a star, a legend, the greatest martial artist who ever lived. Speed wasn't a weakness. It was his superpower. But sitting in that trailer in Rome, Bruce finally understood what his master had meant. He'd let his insecurity drive him. He let the rejections from Hollywood, the racism, the constant need to prove that Asian actors could be leading men. He'd let all that turn his speed into armor. And when Chuck had shown that armor had cracks, Bruce had lashed out. He called Chuck too slow, not because it was true, but because he needed it to be true. Because if Chuck could match him, could counter him, could put him on the ground, then what made Bruce special? What made him the dragon? A knock on the trailer door interrupted his thoughts. "Bruce." It was Chuck's voice, quiet and uncertain. "Can I come in?" Bruce took a deep breath, then opened the door. Chuck stepped into the trailer, and for a moment, neither man spoke. They just looked at each other, Two warriors, two philosophies, two wounded egos trying to figure out how to salvage something from the wreckage. Finally, Chuck broke the silence. "Bruce, I'm sorry about what happened out there. I didn't mean to—" "Don't." Bruce cut him off, but his voice wasn't angry. It was tired, sad even. He gestured for Chuck to sit, and they both sank onto the small couch that barely fit in the cramped space. Bruce stared at his hands. Those legendary hands that had broken boards, defeated opponents, created an entire martial arts philosophy. "You know what the hardest part of being fast is, Chuck?" Bruce asked after a long pause. Chuck shook his head. "It's knowing that one day you won't be." Bruce looked up, his eyes meeting Chuck's. "I've spent my whole life being the quickest guy in the room. It's who I am. It's how people see me. Critics say Bruce Lee is fast. Fans say nobody's faster than Bruce Lee. My whole career, my whole identity is built on that. And when you're that fast, when that's your thing, you start to believe that nothing can touch you, that speed solves everything." He paused, his jaw working as he tried to find the words. "But today, when you caught my kick and put me down, it wasn't that you were faster. You weren't. You were better. You saw what I was going to do before I did it. You had control, timing, power, all the things I've been so focused on speed that I forgot to balance. And that terrified me. Because if speed isn't everything, then what have I been doing all these years?" Chuck listened, his expression serious and thoughtful. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of his own hard-earned wisdom. "My master used to tell me that martial arts isn't about being the fastest or the strongest." Chuck said, "It's about being complete." He said, "A tree that only grows tall breaks in the wind, but a tree with deep roots and strong branches bends and survives. You're not just speed, Bruce. You're philosophy, creativity, passion, discipline. You inspired millions of people. Change how the world sees martial arts. That's not because you're fast. It's because you're complete." Bruce absorbed those words, turning them over in his mind. Then he let out a short, bitter laugh. "Your master sounds a hell of a lot smarter than me." "My master never faced the things you faced," Chuck replied. "He never had to fight for recognition in a country that didn't want him. He never had to prove that someone who looked like him could be a hero. You've carried burdens I can't even imagine. But maybe you've been carrying them so long that you forgot you don't have to fight alone." The silence that followed was different. Not uncomfortable, but contemplative. Two men who'd spent their lives perfecting the art of fighting were learning a harder lesson. The art of vulnerability. Finally, Bruce stood up. "Tomorrow," he said, "we're going to film the greatest fight scene anyone's ever seen. But we're going to do it differently. No more ego. No more proving points. We're going to show the world what happens when two masters respect each other. East and West. Speed and power. Dragon and warrior. Equal." Chuck stood as well, extending his hand. Bruce looked at it for a moment, then bypassed it and pulled Chuck into a brief, firm hug, the kind of embrace shared by soldiers who survived battle together. "Thank you," Bruce whispered, "for the reminder." The next morning, when Bruce called everyone back to the Coliseum, the entire crew expected fireworks. Rumors had spread through production like wildfire. Some people thought Bruce would replace Chuck. Others thought the whole film might be scrapped. The tension was palpable as everyone gathered under the Roman sun. Bruce stood in the center of the arena, arms crossed, watching as Chuck approached. Then, in front of the entire crew, the director, the producers, the extras, everyone, Bruce bowed. Not a casual nod. A full, formal bow. The kind reserved for masters and equals. The kind that carried weight and meaning in martial arts culture. The bow that said, "I respect you. I honor you. I learn from you." The crew fell silent, stunned. Chuck, surprised and deeply moved, bowed back with equal depth and sincerity. "I was wrong," Bruce said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. There was no pride in his tone now, no defensiveness, just honesty. "I let my ego get in the way of something beautiful. Chuck, you're not too slow. You're not too anything. You're exactly what this fight needs. You're powerful, controlled, and real. And if I'm being completely honest, you scare me a little. And that's exactly why this fight is going to work." The crew erupted in spontaneous applause. Chuck smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "You scare me too, Bruce," Chuck said. "That's what makes this special." Bruce grinned, and suddenly he looked younger, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. "Good. Let's scare the audience together. Let's make something they'll never forget." And they did. The fight scene they filmed over the next 3 days became the stuff of legend. But it was different now. Bruce didn't try to overshadow Chuck or make him look weak. Instead, he choreographed a sequence that showcased both men's strengths. Bruce's speed and agility clashed with Chuck's raw power and perfect timing in a way that felt visceral, real, and deeply human. When Chuck landed a devastating kick that sent Bruce sprawling across the ancient stones, Bruce didn't cut it. He kept it in, sold it, made it look brutal, and earned. When Bruce delivered rapid combinations that Chuck barely blocked, the camera captured the genuine effort on Chuck's face, the real struggle defending against someone truly extraordinary. They revised the ending together. Originally, Bruce's character was supposed to dominate throughout. Now, the fight was a genuine back and forth. Chuck's character drew blood. Bruce's character showed vulnerability. They made it a conversation, a dialogue and movement. Two philosophies of combat meeting, clashing, and ultimately reaching a conclusion not because one was superior, but because both were pushed to their absolute limits. The final sequence, where Bruce's Tang Lung delivers a neck-breaking move that defeats Chuck's Colt, became iconic not because it showed Bruce's superiority, but because it showed his respect. After the killing blow, Bruce's character doesn't celebrate. He covers Chuck's body with his coat. He grieves. It's a warrior's tribute to a worthy opponent. When they wrapped that final shot, the entire crew gave him a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Grown men had tears in their eyes. The stunt coordinators called it the greatest fight scene ever filmed. And Bruce and Chuck stood side by side, exhausted, bruised, and grinning like kids who just discovered something magical. Way of the Dragon premiered in Hong Kong in December 1972 and became an instant sensation. It shattered box office records, eventually grossing over $130 million worldwide, an astronomical sum for time. But more than the money, more than the commercial success, what people remembered was a Coliseum fight. Critics called it revolutionary. Not just a fight scene, one reviewer wrote, but a philosophical dialogue. Lee and Norris have created something that transcends cinema. Audiences watched it over and over, studying every move, debating who was winning at each moment, marveling at the chemistry between the two fighters. But the real impact happened behind the scenes and in the years that followed. Bruce and Chuck became genuine friends. They trained together whenever Chuck visited Hong Kong, or Bruce came to Los Angeles. They exchanged ideas about martial arts, philosophy, and life. Bruce softened some of his sharp edges, learning to let go of the need to always be the fastest, the best, the most impressive. He started emphasizing in interviews that martial arts was about self-expression, not domination. Chuck, in turn, gained confidence. He realized that his quiet strength, his humble approach, his focus on substance over style, these weren't weaknesses. They were his greatest assets. Bruce encouraged him to pursue acting, to believe that he could be a star too, that the world needed heroes who didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. Tragically, Bruce Lee passed away less than a year later, on July 20th, 1973. He was only 32 years old. The official cause was cerebral edema, brain swelling triggered by a reaction to pain medication. But conspiracy theories swirled. Some said it was the curse of the dragon. Others blamed overwork, the stress of chasing perfection. The world mourned. Millions of fans wept. Martial arts schools across the globe held memorial ceremonies. Bruce had become more than an actor or fighter. He had become a symbol of breaking barriers, of Asian pride, of the power, determination, and skill. Chuck attended the funeral in Seattle. He stood in the back, away from the cameras and the crowds of fans and celebrities. He wore a simple black suit and sunglasses to hide his red eyes. When they lowered Bruce's casket into ground, Chuck wept openly. He thought about their last conversation, about the bow in the Coliseum, about the lesson they both learned. Speed wasn't everything. Ego wasn't everything. What mattered was respect for the art, for your opponents, and for yourself. What mattered was being willing to be vulnerable, to admit when you were wrong, to grow even when growth was painful. Years later, Chuck Norris would go on to become a movie star in his own right, starring in Good Guys Were Black, The Octagon, Lone Wolf McQuade, and eventually the television series Walker, Texas Ranger. He became a cultural icon, a symbol of American toughness and integrity. The internet would create countless Chuck Norris facts, turning him into a superhuman legend. But through it all, Chuck never forgot Rome. He never forgot the day Bruce called him too slow, and the day Bruce took it back. In interview after interview over the decades, whenever anyone asked about Bruce Lee, Chuck's face would soften. He'd get this distant look in his eyes, as if he were back in the Colosseum, standing across from the dragon. Bruce taught me that being the best doesn't mean you have to beat everyone. Chuck said in one interview decades later, it means you have to respect everyone. He taught me that real strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, admitting when you're wrong, and being willing to learn from anyone, even someone you thought you'd already surpassed. He paused, his voice getting quieter. Bruce was human. He had flaws, insecurities, an ego like we all do. But what made him great wasn't that he was perfect. It was that he was willing to grow. Even at the height of his fame, even when everyone was telling him he was the best, he was still willing to learn. That's the real lesson of our fight in the Colosseum. Not that I was better or he was better, but that we made each other better. So what's the lesson here? What can we take away from the story of Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, two legends who clashed, learned, and ultimately created something beautiful? It's this: the loudest voice in the room isn't always the wisest. The fastest fist isn't always the strongest. And the person who has nothing to prove is often the most dangerous. Bruce Lee was a genius, a visionary, and one of the greatest martial artists who ever lived. But even legends have blind spots. Even dragons can let pride cloud their judgment. When Bruce called Chuck too slow, he wasn't just underestimating Chuck. He was overestimating the importance of a single attribute. He'd built his entire identity around speed, and when someone challenged that, it shook him to his core. But here's what makes this story beautiful. Bruce didn't stay stuck in his ego. He didn't double down, didn't fire Chuck, didn't try to salvage his pride at the expense of the art. Instead, he did something harder. He admitted he was wrong. He bowed. He learned. And in doing so, he showed more strength than any kick or punch ever could. Chuck, on the other hand, had nothing to prove. He wasn't trying to be the fastest. He wasn't trying to be the most famous. He wasn't trying to build an empire or prove that his style was superior. He was just trying to be good at his art, at his craft, at being a decent human being. And in the end, that quiet strength, that unshakable foundation built on humility and respect, was what earned Bruce's deepest admiration. Life is full of Bruce Lees and Chuck Norrises, people who need to be seen and validated, and people who are content to do excellent work without fanfare. People who measure success by applause and recognition, and people who measure by integrity and growth. The world celebrates the former, the loud, the flashy, the fast, but it's often the latter who change the world in lasting ways. Think about your own life. How many times have you dismissed someone as too slow, too quiet, not impressive enough, not on your level? How many times have you let your own speed, whether literal or metaphorical, become a shield that prevented you from learning? How many times have you mistaken silence for weakness, patience for inability, humility for lack of skill? The next time you're tempted to do that, remember this story. Remember that still waters run deep. The wolf doesn't announce itself before it strikes. The greatest warriors are the ones who fight only when they must, and win not because they're the fastest, but because they never stopped learning, never stopped growing, never stopped respecting the art and everyone who practices it. Bruce Lee's legacy isn't just his speed or his movies or his philosophy. It's also his willingness to be wrong, to learn, to grow, to bow to someone he'd underestimated. That's heroic. That's what separates legends from footnotes. And Chuck Norris's legacy isn't just his championships or his action movies or his internet memes. It's his quiet dignity, his refusal to engage in ego battles, his commitment to letting his actions speak louder than his words. That's power. That's what separates warriors from pretenders. The greatest fight in the Colosseum wasn't just between two martial artists. It was between ego and humility, between pride and growth, between a need to be proven right and the wisdom to admit you're wrong. And you know what? They both won. Because when you're willing to learn, when you're willing to respect your opponent, when you're willing to admit that speed isn't everything and silence isn't weakness, that's when you become truly unstoppable. Not because you can't be beaten, but because even in defeat you grow. Even in being wrong, you win. Even in falling, you learn to rise stronger. Somewhere in Hollywood, there's a poster of that Colosseum fight. Bruce in his yellow jumpsuit, Chuck in his black GI, locked in combat beneath a Roman sky. It's become iconic, printed on T-shirts, shared in memes, analyzed in film schools around the world. But if you look closely at their faces in those photos, you'll see something most people miss. Behind the intensity, behind the combat poses, there's respect, there's recognition. There's two warriors who found something greater than victory. They found truth. The truth that speed means nothing without wisdom, that strength means nothing without control, that talent means nothing without humility, and that the greatest victories aren't over opponents. They're over your own ego, your own insecurities, your own need to always be right. Bruce Lee was a dragon. Chuck Norris was a quiet storm. And together, they created something immortal, not just a fight scene, not just a movie, but a lesson that echoes through decades. Legends aren't born from ego. They're forged from respect. And the strongest people you'll ever meet are the ones who have nothing to prove. So the next time someone underestimates you, don't get angry. Don't get defensive. Just smile quietly, stay grounded, and let your actions do the talking, like Chuck did. And the next time you underestimate someone, remember that true strength is admitting when you're wrong, like Bruce did, because at the end of the day, we're all just students in this dojo called life. And the lesson is always the same. Respect everyone. Underestimate no one. And never stop learning. That's the way of the warrior. That's the legacy of the dragon and the quiet storm. And that's a lesson worth remembering. Speed can dazzle. Power can intimidate. But respect? Respect is eternal. And legends aren't measured by how fast they strike, but by how gracefully they bow.